All right, here we go. We're going to do our in-cab inspection. So we're going to start the vehicle with a safety start, and we're going to start below 90 psi. Ready? Here we go. Let's give it a safety start. Vehicle safety start. Oops. That didn't work out right. Here we go. All right, ABS light is cut out and illuminated. Governor should cut out between 120 to 140 psi, and then we can continue on with the air supply test. So we gotta wait for the governor to cut out. I'm gonna charge it a little bit, so it's gonna be a little loud, so we can continue on with our in-cab inspection. Charge it up. Go. Governor has cut out between at 125. So now we are going to continue on with the air supply test. So I am going to put the tractor into gear. Go. I'm going to turn the engine off. Key on. I am going to release the tractor protection valve and the parking brake, and I am going to do make sure my vehicle doesn't lose more than 4 psi. For vehicle combination in less than 1 minute. Tractor's in gear. Let's get the watch going. There we go. All right, we're going to do a vehicle air supply test. Make sure the vehicle doesn't lose more than 4 psi for vehicle combination. Go. In 1 minute. How's your day going so far?
Good. 1 minute up.
Oh, 1 minute's up, and my vehicle did not lose more than 4 psi for a vehicle combination. So now we are going to do a low air warning check, which is the low air warning buzzer should it must activate at 60 psi or above. Ready? There it is. The buzzer activated at 60 psi. So now I'm going to perform a trailer protection valve and a parking brake test to make sure they both pop out approximately at 40 psi. Ready? Okay, they popped out at 40 psi. So now I am going to give it another safety start and charge up the governor. Governor again should pop out between 120 to 140 psi. So now we're going to charge it up so the buzzer goes off, and then we'll do the rest of the in-cab. Let's charge it up really quick. Go. So now we're going to let that charge on its own, and we're going to do start off with a safety belt check. Make sure your safety belt it latches, securely fastens, latches, securely mounted, and it's not cracked, ripped, worn, or frayed, and it's adjusted properly. Next is we're going to do our 3 emergency equipments. I have 3 triangle reflectors behind me. I also have a fire extinguisher that is fully charged and securely mounted underneath my seat. The vehicle is equipped with circuit breakers and no fuses. Next, I am going to move on to the mirrors. The mirrors are securely mounted, they are clean, properly adjusted, and they are not damaged. Next is the windshield. The windshield is not damaged. There is no illegal decals or no obstructions. It is clean. Next is the windshield wipers. I am going to There we go. The windshield wipers are operating properly, securely mounted, not damaged. Next is we're going to do the heater and defrost. Make sure they both are working properly. There we go. They're working properly. Next is the oil and temperature gauge. They are charging at proper levels and operating properly. Next is the voltmeter. The voltmeter is charging and operating properly. Next is the air voltage meter. The air meter is charging properly and at proper levels between 120 to 140 psi. Next is the indicator lights. We got left signal, we got right signal, we got four-way flashers, we got headlights and high beams. Next is the city horn, air horn, both working properly. So now we're going to continue to charge it up so we can go on with the traction protection and parking brake tug test and also the service brake test. So just charge it up. Gotta wait for the governor to cut off before we can perform those tests. There we go. There we go. The air governor is cut out again at 125 PS. So now we're going to perform a tug test. So I am going to release the trailer protection valve, and we're going to do a parking brake tug test. Put the vehicle into gear. Now we're going to perform a tug test on the parking brake, make sure it's working properly. There we go. There we go. Parking brake's working properly. So now I'm going to do a protection valve tug test, make sure it's working properly. So I'm going to release the parking brake to check the protection valve, make sure it's working properly on the tug test. There we go. All right, it's working properly. So now I'm going to release the traction protection valve, and we're going to do a service brake test to make sure the service brakes are working properly, to make sure that the vehicle does not pull either side, left or right. So here we go. All right, here we go with that. Going. All right. There we go. The vehicle did not pull left or right, so the service brakes are working properly. Now we're going to done with that. Now we're going to move on with the rest of the pre-trip inspection. Got it? Was that pretty good?
Mm-hmm. You only missed operating smoothly on your wipers.
I said it.
You said operating properly.
Oh, damn. Damn it.
Okay, we'll go now.
Damn it, operating smoothly. I didn't say operating, I said operating properly. Damn it.
I'm still rolling.
All right, next is we'll do our headlights. Make sure they are clean and clear, not crack, missing, damaged, or broken. Next, after that, will be the turn signals clearance lights. They're not damaged, cracked, or broken, or missing. Proper color for their functioning and positioning is amber. And I also, while I'm here in the front, I also like to check underneath my engine and transmission to make sure my engine hoses are not leaking or damaged, and there's no drips and puddles underneath the engine or transmission. Next, I like to start on this side here. Everything else is on the driver's side, so I start on the passenger side. First, I like to start with the alternator. The alternator is belt driven. The belt is a half inch to 3/4 of an inch, and it deflects in the center. The belt is snug. The belt is not cracked, ripped, worn, or frayed. The alternator wires are securely fastened. The alternator is operating properly, securely mounted, and not damaged. Next is the water pump. The water pump is also belt driven. The water pump belt is not a half to 3/4 of an inch in the center. Not deflect, sorry. The water pump is not leaking. The water pump is operating properly. The water pump is securely mounted and not damaged. Moving on to the radiator reservoir. It's at proper levels, and I will check through sight glass. Oil dipstick is at operating range above the refill mix, above the refill X, and I would check my dipstick. Next is the air compressor. The air compressor is gear driven. The air compressor is operating properly. It is not leaking. It is securely mounted and not damaged. Next is the power steering pump and reservoir. Power steering pump is also gear driven. Power steering pump is not leaking. Power steering pump is operating properly. It's securely mounted and not damaged. Power steering reservoir is at proper levels, and I would check my dipstick. Next is the power steering box and hoses. The steering box and hoses. The hoses are not damaged. They are not leaking or damaged. The power steering box there's no missing nuts or bolts or cotter pins. It is securely mounted. It's operating properly, and it's not damaged. Moving on to the linkage arms and rods. Linkage is not cracked or worn. Joints and sockets are not worn or loose. And no missing nuts, bolts, or cotter pins. Next is the spring mounts. Both spring mounts, they're not cracked, bent, or broken. Bushings are not loose or missing. And it is securely mounted to the frame with no missing nuts or bolts. Spring leaf is not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or shifted, missing or shifted. Nuts and U-bolts. Nuts and U-bolts are not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. Next is the shock absorber. Shock absorber is securely mounted and it's not leaking. Then we will move on to the brakes. The brake hoses. The brake hoses are not cracked, ripped, worn, or frayed. The brake hoses are secure. They are not leaking, and they are air supplied. Next is the brake chamber. The brake chamber is not cracked, bent, broken, or no dents. No loose or missing clamps. It is securely mounted. It is not leaking, and it's operating properly. Next is the slack adjuster push rods. Slack adjuster push rods, they're not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. And you shouldn't be able to pull the slack adjuster push rod by hand more than 1 inch when the brakes are released. Then we have the brake lining. The brake lining is not dangerously worn thin, and there is no signs of oil or grease. Then moving on to the brake drums. The brake drums are not cracked, dent, damaged, or bent. There is no missing nuts or bolts. It is free of debris and no signs of oil or grease. Moving on to the steer tires. The steer tires are 4/32 of an inch, evenly worn thread. Then I would check my sidewalls for cuts or damages. I'd also would check my inflation. Then I would check my valve stem and cap to make sure it's not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. Then I would move on to my rims to make sure my rims are not cracked or broken, no broken welds or free of welds. Then I would move to my lug nuts and bolt holes. I would make sure there was no rust trails coming from the lug nuts and bolt holes. Make sure there's no cracks radiating from the lug nuts and bolt holes, and no distorted bolt holes. Then I would come to my hub seal, and I would check my hub seal to make sure, my hub seal and axle seal to make sure that it's at proper levels and it's not leaking nor damaged. And I would check that out. Moving on to the mirrors and brackets. I would make sure the mirrors and brackets are not cracked, bent, or broken. No loose or missing fittings. Make sure my window is clean and clear and is not damaged, and also make sure my mirrors aren't damaged. Then I would go on to the door. Make sure it opens and shuts properly. Make sure it's not damaged or broken. Make sure the hinges are secure. Make sure the seals are intact. Make sure it shuts properly. Then I would check my side lights. Nope, sorry. I would check my fuel. I would check my fuel cap to make sure it's securely snug and it's not leaking or damaged. Then I would check my fuel tank to make sure it's securely mounted, not damaged or leaking. Then I would go to my lights, my side lights, to make sure they're not damaged, loose, missing, or broken. proper color for their functioning is amber, and their position and function is amber. Then I would go to my catwalk, step, catwalk, and deck plate. Make sure it is free of all debris and objects, securely bolted to the frame, and they are securely, solidly attached. Then I would go to my exhaust. I would make sure my exhaust is not leaking. There is no signs of rust or carbon soot. Make sure that it has no cracks, holes or severe dents, with no loose or missing clamps, and that it is securely mounted. Then I would go to my electrical holes, air lines and electrical holes, to make sure that they are not leaking, that they are not cut, shaved, crimped, pinch, splice, tape, tangle, worn, with no steel braid showing or not dragging on the trailer. Next, I would make sure my glad hands are in good condition, and they are firmly seated, locked into position, with no leaks, with no signs of leakage or anything like that. Then I would check my electrical line to make sure it's firmly seated and locked into position as well. Moving on from there, I would go to my drive shaft. I would make sure my drive shaft is not cracked, bent, broken, and my couplings are free of debris. Then I would go to my torque arm to make sure it's securely mounted and not damaged. Then I would do my frame and cross members, make sure my frame is not cracked, bent, broken, with no broken welds. And then my cross member is not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing. From there, I go to the front of the trailer. I make sure the trailer has no cracked, dents, holes, no loose or missing rivets. I would make sure the lights are not damaged, cracked, missing, loose, or broken. Proper color for their position and functioning would be amber. Then I go underneath the trailer apron. I check underneath the trailer apron, make sure there's no crack, dents, holes. Make sure that the fifth wheel, there's no gap between the apron and the fifth wheel. Then I do the kingpin to make sure it's not cracked, bent, broken, or damaged. And then I do the fifth wheel locking jaws to make sure they are securely tight around the kingpin. Then I would go to my release arm. I would check my release arm, make sure it's fully engaged and locked into position. And then after that, I'll go to my fifth wheel skid plate to make sure my fifth wheel skid plate is properly lubricated with no missing nuts, bolts, or pins or clamps, and that my fifth wheel skid plate is securely mounted to the platform. Then I would check my platform to make sure it's not cracked, bent, broken. Then my platform is securely mounted to my slide assembly. Then I would go from that to my mounting bolts to make sure my mounting bolts are not cracked, bent, broken, loose, or missing, and there's no missing mounting brackets, and that my fifth wheel and slide assembly are solidly attached. Then that would take me to the hoses and locking pins. Make sure the hoses have no leaks. Make sure the locking pins, they are not damaged, loose, or missing. Make sure they are fully gauged and locked into position. That way the fifth wheel frame doesn't hit the landing gear while turning. Next, after that, I'll do my like items. I'll start with my rear suspension. I would check my spring mounts, my leaf spring, my bushings, my nuts and U-bolts, and my shock absorber the same way I check the front. Then I'll go on to my brakes. I would check my brake hoses and fittings. Then I would check my brake chambers. Then I would check my slack adjuster push rods. Then I would check my brake linings and my brake drums the exact same way I did the front. Moving on to my tires. I would check my tires the same, the sidewalls, and then the disc spacers to make sure the disc spacers are not damaged or broken and they are free of debris. I would check my tires, make sure they're 2/32 of an inch and they're evenly worn. Then I would check the inflation on my tires. I would check my valve stem and cap. Then I would check my rims. Then I would check my lug nuts and bolt holes. And then my hub seal and my axle to make sure they are not damaged or leaking. And they are at proper levels. After that, I check my rear air suspension. I would check my rear air suspension to make sure it is securely mounted and it's not leaking or damaged. Then I would check my mud flaps to make sure they are securely mounted, not damaged. Then it brings me to my brake lights, my lights to the rear of the tractor. I check those to make sure they're not cracked, bent, broken, or loose or missing. Proper color for their functioning is red. Then it brings me to the landing gear. I make sure the landing gear is fully raised, make sure the handle is locked into position, make sure there's no loose or missing parts, make sure my legs and plate are not damaged or broken or missing. Then it brings me to the side of the trailer. First I would check my ABS light and my other lights to make sure they're not damaged, loose, or missing or broken. Proper color for their functioning is amber. Then I would check my reflective tape. Make sure it's present and affixed. Color for the tape is red. Then I would move on. I would move on to the back of my trailer. I would check the frame, cross members, torque arm, and the floor to make sure there's no holes in the floor. Make sure there's no broken welds, no loose or broken welds, and make sure the frame is intact. Then I would check my rear suspension. I would check the rear suspension the same as I did the front. I would check my spring mounts. I would check my leaf springs. I would check my bushings. I would check my nuts and U-bolts the same as I did the front. Then I would check my brakes. I would check my brake hoses and fittings, my brake chambers, my slack adjuster push rods, my brake linings, and my brake drums. Then I would check my tires, the sidewalls, and then the disc spacers. Then I would check make sure the inflation's properly. You check that with a gauge. Then I would check my valve stem and cap. Then I would check my rims. Then I would check my lug nuts and bolt holes. And then I would check my hub seal and axle seal to make sure it's not damaged and it's at operating levels. Moving right along from there. Coming to the back of the trailer. I would check my mud flaps to make sure they're securely mounted, not damaged. Then I would check my lights, my clearance lights, brake lights, tail lights, make sure they're not damaged, loose, missing, or broken. Proper color for their functioning and positioning would be red. Then I check make sure my reflective tape is present and affixed. Proper color for that is red. Then I would check the door, make sure it shuts and closes, latches properly, make sure the hinges are intact, make sure it locks properly and closes properly. Then I would check the right side the same as I did the left side.
Yeah.
That's it. Ta-da!